If you are from America, if you're a fan of the U.S. National Park System, or even if you're just a geographic enthusiast, you've probably heard of Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. It is one of the most impressive, beautiful, and unique features on the planet, right? Well, it is impressive and beautiful, but what if I told you that there are dozens of other crater lakes across the world, with some rivaling, maybe even surpassing Oregon's Crater Lake in beauty? In this video, I'm going to highlight 10 of the most impressive crater lakes from across the world, using Google Earth. And I'm also going to be going into the different ways crater lakes can form. Number 1 on this list is so incredibly rare that it is the only of its kind on the entire planet. Starting off at number 10 is the Mount Katmai Crater Lake in Alaska. I chose this one for number 10 because it formed in almost the exact same way as Crater Lake in Oregon. So let's talk about the first way a crater lake can form by looking at these two stories of volcanic collapse. Crater Lake in Oregon is located in the heart of an ancient stratovolcano, Mount Mazama. This was a volcano like any of the other famous stratovolcanoes of the Cascades, probably looking something like Mount Hood or Mount Rainier. It is estimated that Mount Mazama used to stand at 12,000 feet of elevation, even taller than Mount Hood. Then, around 7,700 years ago, Mount Mazama experienced an extremely violent eruption. It ejected 12 cubic miles of volcanic material, draining the underlying chamber. This caused the mountain to collapse in on itself, which created the basin that rainwater and snowmelt would eventually fill to form Oregon's Crater Lake. This process is not unique to Mount Mazama, and it happens regularly all over the world. Mount Katmai is another great example of a collapsed stratovolcano. Except this time, the mountain-destroying eruption actually occurred within recent history. The 1912 Novarupta eruption was one of the largest eruptions in recorded history. Although the eruption did not directly occur at Mount Katmai, it was connected to the lava chamber below Mount Katmai. This is because the eruptive event actually occurred through a vent that jutted out through the side of the mountain. This resulted in Mount Katmai's magma chamber being drained, causing a similar collapse of the summit cone. This created a new, beautiful crater lake in America. This time, however, the crater lake is surrounded by snow and ice year-round and can be a bright turquoise blue. Mount Katmai Crater Lake has been seen up close by very few people since its creation. This is because of the treacherous journey required to reach the top of the rim. Serious mountaineering skills, good weather, and a lot of time, money, and hardship would be required to see this lake in person. I was able to find one blog post detailing the journey, and I will link that below because it's very interesting. Of all the crater lakes on this list, this might be the one that I want to journey to see the most, despite how unlikely that may be. Moving across the Pacific to Japan is Lake Kutara. This lake is also a volcanic caldera lake that was formed in the same way as Crater Lake, Oregon. The most impressive thing about this lake is the fact that it is a near perfect circle. Most other volcanic crater lakes have some deformity to them because the violent volcanic eruptions and subsequent collapses are rarely uniform across all variables. Differences in the rock, the angle of the eruption, and the shape of the underlying magma chamber can all change the shape of the lake. Even Oregon's Crater Lake, which seems very circular in person, is quite misshapen when seen from above. However, in the case of Lake Kutara, a near-perfect circle was created when the Kutara stratovolcano erupted and emptied its magma chamber 40,000 years ago. Lake Kutara is known for having the best water quality in Japan, and although it may not have the high cliffs characteristic of many of the other lakes on this list, it is still beautiful in its own right. Not to mention how incredibly unique it is when compared to the world's volcanic calderas. At number 8, we move south to another island nation, to the striking Lake Quill. This lake is an example of the second way crater lakes can form: glaciers. Sometimes, when the conditions are just right, glaciers can carve out bowl-shaped depressions that then fill with water to form crater lakes. Glaciers are constantly scouring at mountains, and usually they form long U-shaped valleys that have a ring of mountains called cirques at the top. These cirques usually look like this, or this. Often, the glacier will carve a depression just below the cirque, which then form lakes, referred to as tarns. But they are not usually circular, instead usually forming long oval shapes below the cirques. However, when the depression is circular, the resulting lakes strongly resemble the volcanic caldera crater lakes, but are stunning in a whole new way. Lake Quill is an amazing example of this, carved by a glacier during the last ice age. Somehow, just by pure chance, another circular bowl seemed to form right above it as well, forming another small, circular, unnamed lake, which sits high above Lake Quill. I have not seen anything like this elsewhere on Earth during all my searches, and I'm not sure what the odds of this even happening are. Because of the dual crater lakes, I can only imagine what the view would be like from this ridge. However, Lake Quill is quite difficult to visit in the first place, not to mention getting to the upper lake. This is because of the massive cliff protecting Lake Quill from the outside world, which also happens to be the tallest waterfall in New Zealand. Also, fun fact, Lake Quill is the lake pictured in the Windows 10 lock screen that I'm sure many of you have seen. The more you know. Now we head back to Alaska to look at the mighty Mount Douglas. The crater lake at the summit cone of Mount Douglas is a little different than the caldera crater lakes like Mount Katmai crater lake because Mount Douglas is still an intact stratovolcano with a complete summit cone. It hasn't erupted violently enough to collapse in on itself and form a caldera. Instead, it has a small summit crater like many other intact stratovolcanoes, like Mount Vesuvius, for example. However, on most intact summit cones, solid glaciers, muddy volcanic hot springs, or just dry rock occupy the small crater, depending on the elevation and presence of water. It seems that Mount Douglas is the perfect sweet spot where its internal volcanism is melting the overlying glacier to create a deep turquoise blue crater lake, although it does freeze up and turn white during the winter. Much like almost everything else on this list, the Mount Douglas crater lake is almost impossible to reach due to its location on a northern glaciated stratovolcano, and I could only find one recorded ascent of the mountain. The lake is also notable for having an incredibly acidic pH of 1, which would probably melt you if you managed to fall in. So I guess it's good that none of us will be going there. It's now time to head to the crater lake sitting perfectly on the border of China and North Korea, Heaven Lake. I did not expect to find a crater lake here, of all places. The reason I did not expect to find a volcanic crater lake here is because there really shouldn't be any stratovolcanoes here. Stratovolcanoes, which form our crater lakes, usually occur on the boundaries of subducting oceanic plates, like in the Cascades where the Juan de Fuca plate is subducting under the North American plate, or in Peru where the Nazca plate is subducting below the South American plate. That process simply isn't happening here. The two main theories are that Mount Pictou, the volcano holding Heaven Lake, is formed by a hotspot. The alternative theory is that an ancient piece of oceanic crust was trapped under the continent and it's just now sinking, causing the occurrence of the volcano. Either way, it exists, and it's an important mountain for both the Koreans and the Chinese. In the year 946, it erupted violently and created the basin that Heaven Lake now fills. It is undoubtedly an impressive lake and probably one that most people in the West do not know exists due to its placement on the border of the world's most closed-off country. For number 5, I want to explore a type of crater lake that probably hasn't been defined as such before this video. But after looking at many on Google Earth, I think that they could possibly qualify as crater lakes. These are formed by the third way to make crater lakes, moraines. This time, we are looking at the foot of a glacier instead of the head, and when they are present instead of long gone. I'm calling them moraine craters because the ring that holds the water is formed by the terminal moraine from a glacier. This is when a glacier pushes large amounts of debris down a slope and deposits it where it ends. Only here, the moraine is deposited in a way where it makes a circular wall of rock that then accumulates water. They are very rare and only present in the far north. And the best ones I have found are on Baffin Island. Many of them are quite circular and have the general appearance of a crater. I could not find any photos of these, however, which makes them all the more intriguing, because the Google Earth imagery clearly isn't very high quality here. Who knows how crater-like these things actually are? They're definitely pushing the definition of a crater lake, but I wanted to include them because I wanted to highlight some strange examples on this list. Now we head back to Alaska to a more typical volcanic caldera crater lake, Mount Kagayak. Mount Kagayak is very close to Mount Katmai and is also in Katmai National Park. There are two key differences between the two lakes, though. For one, Kagayak Crater Lake is almost 3,000 feet lower in elevation. This allows it to have more greenery surrounding the lake and also makes it more accessible. The second difference is Kagayak Crater Lake has a secondary cone rising from the water, which formed during subsequent eruptions after the caldera formed. And it's very similar to Wizard Island in Oregon's Crater Lake. Because of this, Kagayak Crater Lake looks very different than its sister lake in the Mount Katmai caldera. Of all the crater lakes on this list, this one is probably the one that is most accessible to me. Even then, the trip to see Kagayak Crater Lake requires a float plane ferry and then a long backpacking trip through the grizzly-filled, trailless wilderness that makes up Katmai National Park. At number 3, we go to the Philippines to Mount Pinatubo, and its very recent crater lake. Mount Pinatubo's catastrophic 1991 eruption resulted in the crater lake that we see in this newly formed caldera. This was the second largest eruption in the 20th century, right after the Novarupta eruption that I mentioned earlier. You can tell the recency too, as the caldera looks very raw and scoured, and has yet to be smoothed by the thousands of years of erosion that many of the others on this list have gone through. This example really goes to show how recent a lot of these crater lakes have formed, and how new ones may continue to be created in the near future. With this eruption, we got to see firsthand the development of a crater lake. The crater lake filled with water in just 1 year of monsoon rains, and the water was hot and highly acidic at first, similar to Mount Douglas's lake. It was then diluted year after year by rainfall and cooled to become a less dangerous pH of 5.5. In the future, it might be a deep and clear blue, just like the lakes in Alaska. The Philippine government actually began to control the lake level as it filled, out of fear that the walls of the crater might collapse, releasing a dangerous flood on the people downstream. Today, you can now go visit the crater and view the most recent example of the violent geologic process that has created so many beautiful lakes. Now we head north to Russia. Of all the crater lakes on this list, this might be the one that I think could be considered to be even more impressive than Oregon's Crater Lake. And it might just hold the title of the most spectacular crater on Earth. This is Koltsevo Lake, or Ring Lake on Onekoton Island. This massive crater lake is like if you took Oregon's Crater Lake and put a massive volcano in the middle of it, in place of Wizard Island. The volcano in the caldera is over 2,000 feet taller than Wizard Island and easily clears the crater rim. This creates a very unique and special view that contains a stunning crater lake, like we have seen many times on this list, combined with an impressive stratovolcano that is usually destroyed in the creation of these crater lakes. In this case, the caldera was created first, and then subsequent eruptions created a new stratovolcano in the middle of the lake. Instead of being small mounds of volcanic rubble, in this case it created a tall, cone-shaped volcano. Standing on top of that peak and looking down upon the circular moat of deep blue water and then the encompassing ocean beyond that would truly be a sight like nowhere else on Earth. So far, Oregon's Crater Lake has dwarfed everything else on this list, as it is 5 to 6 miles in diameter. Most of the other crater lakes mentioned are only 1 to 2 miles in diameter. However, in this case, Koltsevo Crater Lake is much more comparable at 4 to 5 miles wide. This caldera is on an uninhabited island in the Kamchatka Peninsula region, and due to being in contested Russian control, it is very, very difficult to access. I can't decide which lake is worthy of the greatest crater lake title, but I think I would have to visit Kołczowo Lake before I could ever decide. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Is this thing really better than Oregon's Crater Lake? Now it's time for some honorable mentions so I can show you just how many awesome crater lakes there are, because there are far more than just the ones I put on this list. So I wanted to give some other places their shout outs that they deserve. Here's my Google Earth file that I was using to save everywhere for this video, and as you can see, there's quite a few, but we'll just go through the highlights here. First up, Iceland does have a pretty awesome one, which is kind of a double crater lake because you have the big one here and then a really small, colorful one. And this one is actually what's super popular in the region. And as you can see here, just this nice, I don't know, it's almost like a milky white color next to the deep blue, larger crater lake. Thought that one was pretty cool. I was not surprised to see one in Iceland. Pretty much everywhere with volcanics has a crater lake. So to move on, we'll go over back to the Kamchatka area actually, and Japan just has a bunch. This is where the Onokoten Island was, but then farther south, there's one that opens up to the ocean and also kind of looks like a smiley face. So that one's cool. We also have some sort of collapsed ones here, again, open to the ocean. And I have no doubt that all of these would be gorgeous. This one, it looks like it's erupted very recently. And then Japan is just covered in them. Next to Lake Katara, these are all caldera lakes as well. There are more caldera lakes up here. All very neat. And then if we go and kind of follow our way around the Ring of Fire here, we looked at Pinatubo, and then there's also Tall Lake, which has another big kind of volcano in the middle of it. But probably most impressively is this area. There are just so many insane crater lakes within a small distance here, and they're all really neat. And the only reason I didn't include them is because they kind of didn't fit the trend on this list of being very remote and hard to reach, but they are very cool. So we have this one here. I think there's actually a big sulfur mine, which is kind of a weird situation because people end up walking down into this crater all the time to mine sulfur. Little bit weird. Then there's this one here. This one is quite beautiful. And what's cool about this one is it didn't actually completely destroy the summit crater, as you can see here, but rather kind of half of it. Or maybe there might have been two cones right next to each other here. I'm not really sure. But it resulted in this pretty unique looking landscape where you still have this good slice of cone and then a big crater lake. And the one just to the east of it, Kelimutu, is just as cool, if not cooler, because it has 3 in 1, and they're very, very colorful. So these are just barely split by this one wall, and then there's a much deeper hole with the dark blue. So I just love that I have 3 different colors here, kind of making a triple crater lake. Finally, just for a couple more shout outs here, this mountain in New Zealand, Mount Ruapehu, has a very beautiful crater lake. I was really wanting to put this one on the list, but there were just so many to choose from. A really cool and iconic landscape up here. There's actually another glacially carved crater lake very close to Quill. As you can see, there's Quill here with its weird double one. And then this one is just right over here, and it looks just as impenetrable and interesting. And I just don't know why they're so close. It seems weird, and they're some of the only ones I can find on the entire planet. Don't know what's going on there. Actually, Easter Island has sort of a crater lake, weirdly enough. And then there are a bunch in Central America and South America that I didn't include, just again because they're not quite as remote or impressive, but still cool. Here's one in Nicaragua. There's a very large one here as well. Like, I'm pretty sure this is all probably from a caldera, although they did create a smaller one there. And here, again, any convergent plate boundary is just going to have a ton of crater lakes on it. Here's one in South America. Quite impressive looking. I think that's probably most of the ones I found, although I do not doubt that there are many, many more. Crater lakes are just so cool. If you guys would want a part 2, I would totally be willing to go more in depth on those. Before we get to number 1, just since a lot of these videos these days are made by AI, I wanted to prove my humanity and that I'm actually making this video by showing you my new room. The last time I did this, I was in another dorm. Now I'm in a new dorm, so I'm just gonna show you my messy room again that I don't think AI could even comprehend. So first up, we got my workstation here. I do everything off my Mac, and I do have a microphone now. Sound quality is hopefully better. Very messy desk. That's my roommate's. Also, here's my epic guitar, Schecter, my closet full of gear, clothes, and books. I do have some climbing stuff now that I'm excited to use in future videos. Ice axe, rope, gree, all that fun stuff. I also got myself a mini fridge since last time. That's exciting. And I've updated the record wall, so let me know if you're a fan of any of these. And yeah, I think that's the room. Proof that I'm not AI, guys. Now, you may be thinking that nothing could top Kotzebue Crater Lake. But I reserved the number one spot for this lake because it is truly unlike anything else on this list and represents the last and most impressive way a crater lake can form: meteorite impacts. This is Lake Manicouagan in Quebec, Canada. This lake is comprised of a wide ring of water, 40 miles in diameter, that fills the ancient crater formed by a meteorite impact from 214 million years ago. The meteorite in question was 3 miles in diameter and would have caused destruction on a scale not seen by humanity. Today, the long eroded crater is still visible from space and eerily resembles a giant eye. Most ancient meteorite craters are not visible today due to the never-ending process of erosion that quickly wipes them away from what we can see with the naked eye. There still are many craters on Earth, but very few of them actually end up filling up with water. The few that do are small, perfectly circular structures resembling Lake Gutara from earlier on this list. A good example of this is Pingualuit Crater Lake in Canada. Funnily enough, this crater lake is located just north of Manicouagan Lake, also on the Canadian Shield. And this lake is impressive in its own right. However, in this one instance, a large crater that holds Manicouagan has survived the test of time and represents a dramatic feature that nothing else on the Earth can even come close to comparing to. The reason for the ring shape is because when the meteor struck the Earth, it actually resulted in post-impact uplift that created Mount Babel in the middle of the structure. This separates it from other meteor crater lakes, which are all missing this central structure. What makes it even more special is that this lake is only possible because of humanity, due to the fact that it's actually a reservoir. Originally, 2 smaller lakes occupied part of the crater ring, and then were connected in the 1960s, forming the full ring of Manicouagan Reservoir. From a certain point of view, it could be argued that this lake shouldn't exist, or at the very least, it shouldn't be considered a crater lake because it's not entirely natural. However, I wanted to include it because it's one of those rare cases where humans changing the surface of the Earth in a massive way actually resulted in something beautiful, instead of largely destroying it. Especially when considering that these 2 lakes already occupied a large portion of the crater, I think it's okay in this case. What I like best about Manicouagan Crater Lake is the fact that it's best enjoyed here on Google Earth. Almost every other lake on this list is extremely difficult to reach, making it impossible for all of us to go enjoy these places in person. However, because of the insane size of Manicouagan Lake, it's best seen here on Google Earth, where its impressive geometry can actually be seen. In person, it wouldn't look like anything other than another northern Canadian lake. Because of that, Google Earth is the best way to see this place, unless you manage to get yourself into space, which I doubt many of us could do. Ever since I learned of Manicouagan Lake, it always draws my eye when I open up Google Earth to research my videos. I just can't believe that a giant 40-mile wide circular ring of water just exists on our planet. I truly believe that it is the most impressive crater lake on Earth due to its history and uniqueness, even if it is only enjoyable from space or Google Earth. Let me know which was your favorite crater lake, or if I missed any that should have been on this list. In the meantime, if you want to watch more videos, I have lots of in-person adventures that you should go check out. Thank you so much to my Patreon members, and thank you so much for watching.